here we have to introduce a very powerful part of the tax code, the IRS Code, IRC, which is section 121C. And this is such an important thing to know because it's going to inform your strategy for how long you hold and when you sell. All right. And what 121C is it says when you sell your primary home, you get an exemption from paying capital gains taxes on up to $250,000 in profit if you're single, or $500,000 in profit if you're married. Welcome to Service and Wealth, the podcast dedicated to helping military personnel master their finances and achieve financial freedom. Our mission is to guide you through the ins and outs of planning, saving, and investing, and most importantly, how to balance savings so you can enjoy life now and retire with confidence. Here we go. Welcome back to the show. This is Service and Wealth Podcast, episode number 29 and part 6 of our Real Estate for the Military series of podcasts that we started back in November, I guess, and it's already January, and we're finally going to wrap it up. I wish it hadn't been that way. I wanted to do everything really quickly within a couple days just to keep my thoughts in order and, kind of move the transitions, because when you take too much time off, maybe you forgot something that you said or a thought or more than likely a promise. I'm sure within episode 5 of this series on real estate for the military, and probably earlier, I probably committed to certain topics and specific examples, and full disclosure, I don't remember. I've never been good at taking notes anyway, and definitely trying to take notes on yourself while you're speaking into a microphone, watching the mixer, and trying to record yourself without being overly self-conscious. Like, that's definitely not happening. So but yeah, anyway, we're back. It's already 2025, and we just ended up having about we haven't uploaded any episodes because there weren't none to upload for the last 2 weeks. So it's really almost like a 3-week break here over the holidays, kind of like traditional military basket leave. Everybody just clears out around Christmas and New Year's and goes home, even if you're not, of that persuasion or belief. That's still kind of just what you do. Like, it's part of the culture. Like, just go home, get out of here. Nobody wants you here. Go use up some of that 30 days of leave that you get. And as I said, that wasn't, my intention. I was trying to get everything recorded and uploaded, but as a common theme in my opening ramblings on these episodes since the beginning of the podcast, I'm basically here in my military retirement, doing a few things part-time, managing rental properties, building a new fix and flip and BRRRR type business out with a couple partners, and most importantly, just being a dad and being here for the family and running the house and all that. And so, essentially we recorded 2 episodes in one day about a week before, Christmas, about 10 days before Christmas. And then, like 2 days later, we were on a plane to Austria where we did our sort of winter vacation. Didn't go skiing, but we just basically force-fed ourselves Christmas, for like a week straight. Because I got to tell you, the way that, Christmas gets done in Europe, but especially in places like England and Germany and Austria, Northern Italy, lots of places in France, all the, pretty much throughout is you have all these small towns to big cities, and these cities are thousands of years old. And they almost all started as market towns. And so in the center of all these towns, there's still this big open area where every day or every week they're having normal farmers markets and craft fairs and like all that stuff. It's still a market town. The culture's there, the history's there, the civic architecture's there. And then, once late November rolls around, they just turn it into giant Christmas markets. And so, like, I'm a kid at heart, especially when it comes to Christmas. And my daughter obviously is a perfect age to really celebrate Christmas and understand it and participate in everything. So, we just went from town to town and did as much Christmasing as we could, kind of Christmased our faces off. And, that's everything from riding Ferris wheels and roller coasters to eating cotton candy that is like the size of a small child, drinking punches and mulled wine and all that kind of stuff. And just, that was sort of our Christmas time. And then when we came back, we were hosting family. And so here I am sort of opening my eyes for the first time. And I guess it's been about 18 days where there hasn't been either travel or family hanging all over the place. And so, but I think that's fine. I think it's every once in a while you need a little break and reflect. And for me, that's really what I did a lot of during this time is, obviously being present and engaged with my daughter and my wife and my family and family members and all the stuff we were seeing and doing. But in the in-between times, I was reflecting. I was like, what am I doing with my life, right? These kind of big questions. They start out small, and then you think about them, and they start to become kind of big. And, obviously the Service and Wealth podcast and the Military Wealth Coach is the big new project that we started. We started in earnest in 2024, although our book, Service and Wealth, which you can get online through Amazon Direct Publishing, it's titled Service and Wealth as well, and it's just a really kind of brilliance in the basics, like 10 good money habits that I wish I would have started when I was in my 20s, and they're all borrowed from the smart money habits and investing strategies used by, the top 1%, like the wealthiest people and families in America, the millionaires and the billionaires. They all do these things, and a lot of them we didn't do, or we collectively as the military kind of being, generally a middle class organization and culture and community. Like when you read that book and you go through the 10 different money habits that you should be following in your life, you're going to find like you might accidentally be doing a couple, but more than likely you're following a lot of really toxic money traits, right? You're probably running up some consumer debt, maybe not paying off a credit card in full. You probably have an auto loan. You're probably maxing out your thrift savings plan contributions and not saving cash elsewhere. You probably don't have a Roth IRA that you use for backdoor conversions. You might make additional contributions into it, but you're not managing the matching funds and deposits that the military gives you through the blended retirement system. You probably don't have enough insurance on either yourself or your property. There's a lot of things out there that are, one, kind of robbing you of potential profits and potential gains, more wealth, more cash flow, and two, that are putting what you do have at risk, right? And so whether it's for you or for your family when you're gone, you're putting it at risk because of the way that we're just following a different set of, recommendations and strategies and rules for dealing with money that come from the financially illiterate middle class. And I'm just saying that as somebody who came up that way and through trial and error and making some bad mistakes and suffering through six-figure, losses in crypto and the stock market and things like that from not properly managing or strategizing, or not saving enough, not having enough cash, not having enough insurance, like all these things. I made a lot of these mistakes, and over the course of 20 years, it led me down this path to eventually knowledge. And now I'm looking back and I've related a couple times before. I finished my career as an officer in the Marine Corps teaching at the Naval Academy, and one of the most common questions, other than like, what's one piece of advice you have for a young officer, was what's something that you, if anything, regret from your time in the service? The midshipmen and other service members, young service members, start asking you that once they know you're retiring, because they're like, oh, now they're going to be honest with me, right? And that's really sort of where the inspiration for this brand and this channel and this podcast and everything came from. Was, man, what do I regret? Is I regret being so foolish with my finances and investing back in my 20s and 30s that, like, I put my family, between a rock and a hard place, and we've had to live an underconsumption lifestyle, counting pennies for the last 5 years, just to get ourselves kind of caught up to where we ought to have been. But we're still not where we want to be. And so we're still following these habits. The things that we talk about on this show are the things that we're doing, right? So we're not just regurgitating something we read or trying to hype up, other things like real estate just because it's pretty popular, especially in the military. A lot of people follow the Bigger Pockets podcast and read their books and get into real estate haphazardly or accidentally, or sometimes because they do have a good mentor, or somebody who's leading them down that path. But we're not just, trumpeting that stuff. These are things that we found worked, things I've learned over 20 plus years in finance and economics, all the way back to when I was getting my master's in economics and whatnot. So, that's where we are. And that brings us to today, this sort of sixth in the series of podcasts here on the real estate for the military. It's kind of like our capstone. We started out by just saying, like, what is real estate anyway? Where is ownership? What are the common terms you need to know? What are the legal jurisdictions? Who are the people that are involved in real estate transactions? What are you actually buying and selling? What are you inspecting? What are you appraising? Like, why do these things matter? And then we moved into, once you understood what those things were, how to turn those into questions and, sort of like your own battle drill or SOP, so that you could start to do adequate and accurate research on real estate before you got into it. You could ask the right questions of real estate agents, loan officers, title officers. Throughout our whole, I guess between my wife and I, we could say like is it almost 20? No, it's probably more like just under 15 years of buying and selling real estate. She started before I did. Not by much. She got a jump on me by a couple of years. But, through that whole time, like, pretty much every time we've had a very stressful transaction and, like, run into problems that have cost us either time or money, it came down to one of these quote-unquote professionals who they didn't do good due diligence. They didn't follow their own checklist. They forgot something. They just made a bad choice or were uninformed. And here we are in 2024 and going into 2025, and the thing that we found that works the best for us is to just ask direct questions up front and realize that we can, change out team members. If we don't like the agent, we'll just go find somebody else. They're a dime a dozen, right? And then we moved into, after sort of screening our team, if that's what you want to call it, we moved into the kind of breaking down the process of buying a home and the key steps that have to happen from the time you make an offer, get an offer accepted, go under contract, all the way out to close, and kind of explain where those timelines matter, which is, again, I think that's really, valuable, because you can stress out a lot being like, oh, I haven't heard from my agent in 7 days. What's going on? Well, if you know that they are just waiting for a VA certified appraiser to come out and do an appraisal or do a desktop appraisal even, which just means they get on Zillow and look stuff up. They don't actually go to the property. Now like that can take 2 weeks, sometimes more. If it's going to take more than 2 weeks, you probably want to find an agent who's got a better connection to an appraiser, who's got a little bit more, stroke to get that appraiser scheduled faster. But you're also, you can kind of keep track of the process, and beyond just like not stressing, you can check in at appropriate times with the agent or the loan officer and remind them that you exist, that you're trying to buy this house, that this should be going on, and you need updates, right? Because they're going to get commissions paid out of the sale price of that house, which means essentially they all work for you until close. And then we went from there and we kind of talked about financing and mortgages and why those are things that you should use and should not be afraid of, because, I'm sure every single one of us has a buddy, a dad, a mom, an aunt, uncle, a grandma, grandpa, somebody who's like, I have no debt, I have no mortgage, I pay cash, right? And you're like, that sounds dumb, honestly, or at least you should after you're listening to that episode. And then, just before the week before Christmas, the episode, part 5 of this series that we dropped was all about the VA loan and talking about the different types of VA loans, the different things you can do with the VA loan, and really what we wanted to do is at this point, you understand what property is, you understand who's involved with it, you understand the legal documents, you understand the process and the timelines, you understand how the bank is involved, and how the mortgage relates to the actual property, and the amount of money you got to put down, if any, to your primary mortgage insurance or not, depending on your financing options, and then just apply it very specifically into the VA loan. And we call that, the VA loan is your tactical nuke, right? And why did we do that? Well, that's what we're going to cover in today's episode, is why this is not a conventional warhead. This is not like firing salvos of MLRS. If you remember, I don't think any of us remember, but if you've seen on like YouTube or Live Link, or even just in training videos, the old Russian style multiple rocket launcher systems with 16 or 32 tubes, and they're just firing off, like strafing these unguided conventional rockets for essentially an area strike. And that's not what the VA loan should be. One, you can't, as we talked about, you have this loan limit that you can qualify for at any one time to be a conforming loan product, which is set by the federal government, by the IRS, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and just trickles down to us with the VA loan. So you can't just use it time and time again. You can't go 20 years through a military career, or even, 6 years through the military and another 14 years doing something else, and own $3 or $4 or $5 million worth of real estate, all financed with the VA loan. Like, you're just going to run out, right? So you can't use it every time. And that sort of opened the door for today in our 6th episode, or part 6 in this series on real estate for the military, in which we go through a game plan on how you can mix and match different financing products and build out for yourself wherever you are in your life and in your career and what age you are, a 10, 15, 20-year roadmap. You don't have to get super detailed, right? We're not talking about like an actual operations order. This is more like a campaign plan. And it mixes in the different financing options that you have. And if you follow it, then you're going to be able to pull out that VA loan in a very tactical fashion and use it at a time that can be life-changing. You don't want to, just as an example or an allusion to what I'm talking about, is you don't want to go out and buy like a big expensive house with a VA loan in San Diego. If you're, say you just pinned on like chief petty officer and you move down there and you qualify for like a $600,000 VA loan, and you're like, sweet, let's do it. And you know that you're only going to be at that shore station, shore duty for 24 months. Maybe you can extend it for 12, but you've got a sea tour following after that you're going to have to go do. And, because of your specialty, it's more than likely going to be based out of, Yokosuka or Norfolk or something like that, right? Don't put yourself in a bind of having used your VA loan to buy this big expensive house in San Diego that you're going to have to get rid of in 2 years if you want to use a VA loan again, right? Especially if retirement's coming up. You're going to want to have that VA loan, locked and loaded for you. And so we're going to talk about that today. So this is going to be sort of like if we could start all over back at age 26, that's just sort of like the start point that makes sense for me. And just kind of go back and say, this is how I would have laid out sort of my campaign plan over a 20-year. So I guess that's not quite, that's 17 years ago. So, okay, we won't get, all mired up in the details here. But just sort of this campaign plan and how you can take this, do some tweaks for yourself, and come up with a way to build out a portfolio of $2, $3, $4, $5 million worth of rental real estate, cash flowing rental real estate that is going to be, life-changing wealth. And it could help you become totally financially independent and gain financial freedom in your 40s. All right, that's sort of the promise of real estate investing. And, to recap what we talked about, in the last episode, I believe was, that's it. I just remembered. Okay. I was going to do another episode, like a 7th episode in this series, and talk about the different ways that you make money with real estate. Right on. I guess we'll extend this series for one more. So without getting too far into it, right, you're going to create wealth through real estate faster than anything else because of the leverage that the mortgage gives you. And if we just assume that you're going to do a 10% down conventional loan, that means you're going to finance, we'll say you're going to finance $100,000 for a house. Well, you finance 90, right? You're going to buy a $100,000 house. You put $10,000 down. If you own that house for 10 years and it doubles in value, you now have $200,000 worth of a house. You only put 10% of the payment to buy that house, but you get 100% of the profits, right? So it's not that your share doubled from 10,000 to 20,000 and the bank's share doubled from 90,000 to 180. The bank gets none of it, right? You turn $10,000 into $100,000. And that represents a annualized compound return on interest or return on investment of 25.89%. 25%, right? Now, if you've been paying attention to the stock market, you know that in 2023, the stock market was up about 25% in 2024. Sadly, December closed out with a whimper, and we lost a couple percentage off the top, but it was still like 22, 23% up, and these are banner years, right? We could get a third year with that kind of business cycle and the cyclical nature of stock markets. That doesn't go for 10 years, right? It does not continue. But with real estate, it does. And it's because of the economics of it, but also because of the leverage you get to use. And so there's a reason to use your financing. There's a reason to invest in real estate because it can help you create more wealth faster. And, I was about to say, if you just want to do the same thing in stocks, if you want to turn 10,000 into 100,000 over 10 years, you're going to have to somehow magically figure out how to get 25% returns per year when over 130 years, the U.S. stock market average is closer to 11 or 12%. And it may even be kind of compressing down to long run, we're saying over 10, 20, 30 years, annualized returns, which means over 10 years, it doesn't just come back at 11% gain. It comes back at 11% on average each year for all of those 10 years. And that's really a way that you, in the stock market, you can make good money. That'll turn your 10,000 into like 27 or 28,000 over 10 years. But if you're trying to make life-changing wealth, if you're trying to achieve financial independence in your 40s and 50s and retire early, go do whatever you want, pursue your own dreams, have enough wealth to live your dream life or start your own business or buy out the family ranch and keep it in the family because you're the Duttons or something like that, you're not going to get there with this slow and steady approach to the stock market. That's great for over 30, 40 years for a great retirement. But the real estate is a way that you can move up your timeline, accelerate your wealth. And again, we don't talk about this just for the sake of money, right, or the love of money or the greed. It's literally so that you can do the things that you want to do with your life. Like, you don't want to be this super sad and depressing contractor for a 3-star command working in a building with no windows for the next 30 years after you get out of uniform, right? Like, you're going to breathe in all that asbestos, drink lead-contaminated water, breathe in mold from the carpets that haven't been changed since the 80s. Like, nobody wants to do that. But sometimes we have to if we didn't plan our wealth smartly. And so, as we jump into it, we'll really quick standard disclaimer that we do on the show. Remember, every investment has risk. And what we're talking about here is not financial, legal, or tax advice. We're talking about strategies. We're talking about building up your financial IQ and helping you really just educate yourself in the world of finance and investing. And when it comes to investment choices in your life, do your own research, make your own decisions, and as always, own the consequences. So, all right, so moving on. So what's this campaign plan? What's the strategy that we're talking about? It can't just be the VA loan. And so what we've also introduced, we've talked about conventional loans in part 4 of this series. And we talked about, really important from that episode, right, is that you don't have to do 20% down. The bank's going to have to qualify you for something less than 20% down, but they generally don't really care. So long as your credit score is, above like a 680 in the 700s, you have a military paycheck, which means you have guaranteed employment and guaranteed income. You are extremely low risk borrower to most banks. And as we said in that episode, the reason why they require 20% down is that if the housing market collapses or something's wrong with the property and they have to do a short sale and sell it for 80% of the value, they're still going to get their money back that they loaned. And so if you put down less than 20%, they charge you primary mortgage insurance, PMI. That usually is somewhere on the order of like 1 to 1.5% of the loan amount over the course of a year. So if you borrow $300,000, you might have an insurance premium of like $3,000 a year, split up, in each monthly payment to $250 a month. But that $3,000 a year in mortgage insurance will typically end once the value of the property has gone up enough that the mortgage balance is now less than 80% of the property value. So if you put 10% down, and in this case we're talking about a $330,000 house, you put 10% down, you borrow $300,000, it's got a 90% loan to value. You only need that property to go up about 8 or 9%. So now it's going to be worth about $360,000. And that'll take on average, in the average market, 3 years, 2 to 3 years, 4 years. And over that time, you're going to have paid down the principal. And now you're going to have a loan to value of 80% or less. And you can call up the bank and be like, hey, check it out. Here's the home value. Here's the loan balance. It's less than 80%. Can you please take away the PMI? And they're like, oh, yep, that makes sense. Or maybe you refinance out of it. Refinance out of it with a new lender. They will automatically see that the loan to value is 80% or less, and you won't have PMI. And what does that buy you? Well, again, from this example, $330,000 house, 20% down is $66,000. You put 30 down. So we'll just say 60 versus 30. So you save $30,000 that you had to save up for a down payment by putting 10% down instead of 20. And it costs you $3,000 a year for PMI. you could pay that for 10 years before it's a bad deal, right? So don't be afraid of that PMI. And we want to bring that forward from part 4, because part of our strategy here is to buy real estate frequently and do it using loan products that don't require you to save up $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 for a down payment. Why? Because then it's not possible, right? You would have to live out of a Corolla that you own or pay cash for and eat ramen in order to save $70,000 or $80,000 over the course of 2 or 3 years in the military, right? But you got to live off that. So it's not really possible. But saving up $20,000 to $30,000 every 2 to 3 years, that is really doable. That works out to like $833 a month. So long as you're not maxing out and like putting $2,000 into your thrift savings plan, just put like $700 or $800 in there, and then put $800 in a high yield savings account. The high yield savings account earning 4.5%, 5% interest is going to have the same function as bonds in your portfolio, in that it's generating a reasonable return that's beating inflation. So it's preserving the purchasing power of your money. And it's a guaranteed return. It's like almost zero risk. It's cash. It's cash that earns you 5%. Like that's pretty awesome. And if you doubt it as being awesome, just think about, look at the headlines. Just Google like Berkshire Hathaway or Warren Buffett, and you'll see that they're always selling investments at a profit, and then they're putting that money back into cash, but it's going into cash or cash equivalents, money markets, maybe high yield savings. I don't see why not. Things that are still earning them 4 or 5%, and then it's highly liquid cash. And when they have a chance to invest in something that's a good deal, they can do it, right? And so you've got to start doing the same thing. So that opens the door for us, right? Like no longer do we have this sort of uninformed view that you can either use a 0% down VA loan or you have to pay 20% down with a conventional loan. You can do 10 or 15% down with a conventional loan, maybe less. You probably have to be extremely well qualified to go down to like 5%. I'm pretty confident none of us is going to get 0%, but like 10% that's reasonable. And I say it's reasonable because, we did it. When we wanted to really expand our portfolio and purchase a couple vacation rentals, we had to kind of hold on to extra cash in order to like furnish and finish and supply these properties. And, that's, I think a good kind of planning factor is like about $10 to $15 per square foot to furnish like a vacation rental. So, you go buy a couple 1,500 square foot vacation rentals, you're like looking at needing $15,000 for each to like furnish and finish them. Well, that's $30,000. If you are trying to do 20% down on those two properties, now, you've got to have like 6 figures cash just to get started. But if you can put 10% down, the money you save on the down payment, that'll go to furnish it. Then the people renting your properties are going to pay that PMI, and you don't care anyway, right? So it's something that we do, and we're going to do again. And then there's another tool that we need to, before we get to that other tool, since I brought it up, the VA loan, right? The VA loan 0% down is just one option, and it's not a very good option. It's kind of like a break glass in time of emergency, or the 0% down, this sort of like haymaker that you can throw at the VA loan is once you're retired and have at least 10% disability, because then the funding fee is waived, right? And so if you do a 0% down with the VA loan, the first time you're going to pay a 2.15% funding fee. And then every time after that, you're going to pay 3.3% funding fee. So that can be like $10,000, $20,000 that you're paying the VA just to get that loan, and you're never going to see that money again. Well, if you have $10,000 or $20,000 that you can afford to pay a funding fee for the VA, why don't you just put it towards a down payment, and then you'll get that back because it's instant equity, All right. So we've hopefully kind of broken out of that like misconception or bad strategy that like the VA loan is only 0% down, or that you should use 0% down if you can. In fact, I would argue that the optimal with a VA loan is 5% down. Why do I say that? Well, the funding fees don't really change. 5% down, the funding fee is 1.5%. If you put 10% down or more, it only goes down to 1.25%, right? 0.25%. You might as well pay the 5% down, pay the 1.5% funding fee, and if you have the cash that could have made 10% down on the VA loan, just buy a bunch of points to lower your mortgage rate, interest rate on your mortgage, right? And then you're already getting at least 0.5% lower rate with the VA loan. Well, if you buy it down another percentage point, or maybe 1.5 percentage points using that additional 5% instead of a down payment to pay down points, you could be saving yourself a few $1,000s each year in interest, right? And that's huge, especially now that we're back in sort of this normalized interest rate normal environment in which mortgages are in like the 6 to 7% range for a 30-year fixed mortgage. Like that's the normal. The 2.5% mortgage rates of the late, I guess I've been from maybe like 2017 through like 2022. That's sort of, zero when the Fed rate was zero before COVID and then zero during COVID. We don't really want those to come back. They were only at zero because we were in a massive economic crisis. So if you look back over the past 60 to 70 years, since, the 1950s, the average has been about 6 to 7% for a 30-year fixed mortgage for a qualified borrower, right? So we're back in this normal bit. And if you can afford to pay down a little bit on the rate, save yourself a lot of money over a lifetime on interest payments. It's worth it, right? Similar to our example with the going 10% on a conventional loan, saving $30,000 or $35,000 from compared to putting 20% down and then paying $3,000 a year in mortgage insurance. Even if you have to pay that for 10 years, it's still less cash out than that trying to do the 20% down. Same thing here for the VA. If we just took a very basic look at it, if you could put 5% down and then another 5%, it goes into paying the funding fee and then paying down your interest rate by 1.5%. Sure, you might have had to come up with an extra $15,000 to do that, but you're going to save. Again, this is on our $300,000 home, and we're using current VA rates of around 6.5% to get it down, and you've paid it down to like 5 or 5.25. You're gonna save that money in saved interest. You're gonna save it back within the next 2 to 3 years, right? A cheaper house, not so much. More expensive house, you'll save it back more quickly because of how interest is calculated. But again, that's a good return on investment if you look at it from that standpoint, which you should. It shouldn't just be my belief or my uncle told me or my mom said I should do this because she did that when she was, when she pinned on 04 in the Air Force and bought their house that she retired in. Just because someone else, even if no matter how much you love them and respect them, like if it's not treated in a sensible way, like an investment with strategy in mind, probably shouldn't do it. Okay. All right. So then one more product that I think we've referred to a couple times, but it's an FHA loan, a Federal Housing Authority loan, right? And these are loans for first-time home buyers. So long as you have a credit score of at least 580, you can get a house with 3.5% down payment. If you have a credit score above 500 and below 580, which is pretty bad, but it's also not unheard of, especially if you're young, you can get an FHA loan, but you have to make a down payment of 10%. All right. But look at smart investments in real estate. using a down payment, not trying to get in with a 0% down payment, especially if you have to turn around and sell it. You could be underwater. You could have to come up with cash just to sell your own house, right? And so the FHA loan, we're gonna assume that you don't have massive payday loans. We're gonna assume that you have not had a car repossessed. We're gonna assume that you have not been foreclosed on, and we're gonna assume that even if you're 20, 21, 22, 23, you have a credit card that you've had for a few years. You pay it off every month, so you have some credit history, strong payment history, consistent payment history, and you've got at least a 580 credit score. You can use this FHA loan with 3.5% down payment. Now, there's also an FHA 203K loan, and that's really what we want to focus on, okay? Now, the reason why we have to get it right in our strategy and our campaign plan for becoming, real estate moguls, is FHA loan is for first-time home buyers, right? So once you've gone out and purchased another home, like the FHA is going to look into it. There's a lot of paperwork you have to file because they don't want any person, to just come along and use this. Like if I could go back right now and take out an FHA loan and buy an investment property with a 2 or 3K loan for 3.5% down, I would do that in literally 2 seconds. But I can't because I'm not a first-time home buyer, even though I never used the FHA loan before, right? So, and the FHA loan, you can do traditional to finance primary residence. You can do the 203K, which the reason why this one is really special is that when you apply for the loan, you also get to put in the application that you want to fix up the property. And then the FHA loan will include money. So let's say that here's an example of how that would work, is you've recently commissioned into the Marine Corps you were like a naval ROTC member, wherever. You commissioned, you went to Officer Candidate School, the basic school, and you've just finished your specialty school. We call it MOS in the Marine Corps, your military occupational specialty, OC field rating, whatever you want to call it for your particular branch. And so, now you've been getting paid for over a year. You go to your first duty station, and, let's just say it's the lovely and scenic Jacksonville, North Carolina. And you've got steady pay, you've got BAH. Now you want to buy a house, you want to get into real estate. All your buddies are talking about use a VA loan. And they're looking at these houses that are now, they're relatively new builds. They're being sold after like first owner, which was, like some captain and her husband bought like this $250,000, house in a kind of an exurb of Jacksonville. I don't even know if that exists, an exurb of Jacksonville. Is Jacksonville even that important? Now they owned it for like 6 years, and now they're selling it for like $325. And you're like, oh man, well, I can afford that payment if I do a VA loan, but I've only got like $20K saved up, so I only have enough for closing costs. I can't really do 5% down on the VA loan. Oh, I think I can swing it. It's going to take all my cash. Well, instead, what this young lieutenant should be doing is she should be filling out an application for an FHA 203K loan. And she should go find in some slightly older part of town a house that has not been taken care of. It's on a good street. There's a lot of nice houses on the street, and this is like the ugly duckling on that street because the owners, it's their kids selling because the owners just had to go into like terminal care. They've owned the house for 40 years, never rehabbed it, didn't do a lot of maintenance. And so, the kids are like, I don't think anybody wants to buy this. Well, maybe you can buy it for like $100K. And maybe that if you can put 30 or 40K into the rehab, it'll be worth $250,000. I mean, maybe that's a stretch, but it's not unrealistic. It hasn't not happened. Well, if you, as a first-time home buyer, you can put together that package, show the FHA, show the value that you're going to add, and over the next 2.5 years, while you're going to work, learning your craft, maybe you have to do a 6-month, float with a Mew. But in the in between time, you're just swinging a hammer on the weekends. Have friends come over. You have a couple beers while you're just rehabbing the kitchen, right? And it's a fun project. And you got in for 3.5% down payment on this thing. So, and you got money. You got 20, 30, 40K from the FHA to rehab it, right? And so the 203K mortgage program it's like a secret weapon. Once you know about it, so long as you still haven't bought a house and you're still eligible, like it should be your go-to. And that is our first phase. That is the first part of our campaign plan and the first tool that we're looking to use. So the very first time you buy a house in the military, you should be looking to use the FHA loan because you can only use it once, and it's 3.5% down. Ideally, you can buy a fixer-upper and you can get some extra cash, and then you add value. And that's your first duty station. That's what you do. Now, the goal from this point is to build this portfolio, right? And you've used the FHA card, so that's gone. But you put so little cash out of pocket that you have plenty of money that you can save up, right? And it's a cheap house, so you're not having to use all your BAH for your housing. So there's more money you can save. So over 2 or 3 years, you're able to save up enough, $20,000, $30,000. Maybe you go on a deployment and you can save another $20,000 on top of what you can do by just smart budgeting each month. And now 3 years later, you PCS and who knows where you're going, right? Like, I don't want to say Hawaii or Japan because that's pretty hard. But, maybe you're going out to California or whatever. And now this second phase is you're looking to use a VA loan in this slightly more expensive market. And it's not always the VA loan next. Like if you were going the opposite direction, if you started in California and did a fixer-upper, and then you moved to North Carolina or Texas or Missouri, Oklahoma, some other place where there's military installations, South Dakota, right? And like relatively low-cost housing. When you're going to a lower-cost market, use a conventional loan and go with 10% down. Hold on to your VA loan, so this could be, this legitimately, like depending on how your career goes, you might use an FHA loan in your second year in uniform, your 5th year in uniform, you use a conventional loan. Then in your 8th year in uniform, you use a conventional loan. And then in your 11th or 12th year, that's the first time you even touch the VA loan, right? Because you've been in low-cost markets, so it didn't make sense to use it. Because the magic is you can get away with 0 or 5% down, which means you can buy a more expensive piece of property for less cash. Now that's sort of the battle rhythm and the routine, right? Now there's some other important parts of this, which are what do you do with the property when you move? A lot of people feel like you just have to sell it. That's a bad idea. And that's not building a portfolio. That's not building wealth. That's just capturing, hopefully, a little bit of profit. But then you're sacrificing the cash flow from having that property as a rental. And so here we have to introduce a very powerful part of the tax code, the IRS Code, IRC, which is section 121C. And this is such an important thing to know because it's going to inform your strategy for how long you hold and when you sell. All right. And what 121C is it says when you sell your primary home, you get an exemption from paying capital gains taxes on up to $250,000 in profit if you're single, or $500,000 in profit if you're married. Now that's huge, right? Why? Well, if it wasn't your primary home and you sold it, then you would be subject to capital gains if the value went up. Let's say you bought this house. We'll just stick with like nice round numbers. $100,000 house. You own it and live in it for 2 years, 3 years, and then you sell it for $120,000. Now, the way you have to report that is you say my basis or my purchase price was $100, my sale price was $120. I had to pay $6,000 in closing costs, so that goes into my basis calculation. So I got $120, my basis was $106. That's $14,000 in profit. And that comes in as a long-term capital gain, which means it's going to be taxed at whatever your income tax rate is. And probably for most in the military, since a bulk of our income comes from BAH, as we talked about before on the show, you're almost always going to be one tax bracket lower than a civilian equivalent, right? So if you're making $80,000, only $50,000 or $60,000 is reported to the IRS as taxable, so now you're in the 12% tax bracket. And in this case, that $14,000 you made would be taxed at 12%, and you would owe, what's that, about $1,700 in additional taxes for selling your house. But because it was a house you lived in, it was your primary residence, it's exempt. You pay zero tax, right? So you keep $1,700 in your pocket. Now, you can probably envision what that means if you buy a more average house, and you own it for a little bit longer, and it goes up in value a little bit more. Let's say you buy a house, average sticker price, $400,000 house, in Waco, Texas. You own it for 6 years. Now it's worth $525,000, and after closing costs, there's $100,000 profit. Well, not only does it get added into your income and get taxed, but that major chunk of money, that $100,000, probably pushed you up from the 12% into the 22% tax bracket, which means you're going to have to pay $22,000 in taxes on that $100,000 profit. That can hurt, right? Especially if you're counting on that money to go, buy your forever home or, start a business. Having to give up $22K, that's pretty sad. Maybe you've obviously the numbers only go up as the property value gets higher. It's important to note that you don't have to worry about what you owe on the mortgage, right? So in this case for Waco, you sell for $525. You've owned it for 6 years, and so you only owe like $325 on the mortgage. That $200,000 difference, that's not how it works, right? The IRS only cares about the basis, which was the purchase price, plus any, renovations or closing costs or other, agent commissions and fees and all that stuff. That's your basis, because that's how much it cost you to get it, and that gets subtracted from how much you got when you sold it, right? So it's not the mortgage balance, it's the basis. But where 121C comes in as being so powerful is it says, so long as you've lived in that property, you call it your primary residence for 24 months. It doesn't have to be consecutive. 24 months out of the last 5 years, it qualifies as your primary residence, and it qualifies for the tax exemption, right? Now, that's huge. Why? Because think about it. We tend to PCS every 3 years. That means you can PCS and keep that property for 3 more years, renting it out to your friends who stayed, at that last duty assignment, new folks who came into your unit, trustworthy military families, responsible military families who are renting it out. You're getting that cash flow. They're helping pay down the mortgage. The value's going up, up, up. Holding on to it for 3 years and then selling it, it still fits on that 121C exemption. So that with this, the first part of our strategy using the FHA loan, buying this house, we fix it up. We don't have to sell it right away. We want to keep it through that next PCS cycle. And now, depending on your community and your service branch, there's a lot of us who PCS back and forth, right? Like you might go from, what's that joint base Lewis McChord or whatever. Like you might fly a certain type of aircraft, or you might be a mechanic or avionics or weapon system, or maybe you're a damage control officer, like those highly sought after engineering types in the Navy who are almost only at like Norfolk. They're going to be there for 3 years. Then they're going to go off and they're going to go to school, or maybe go do a recruiting job. And then they're going to come back to like that same duty station. Well, now you can move back in, reset your, 24 months out of 5 years clock, and you can extend the hold period on that property even longer. The average homeowner in the United States, it used to be about 13 years that they own a home. Now it's down to like 11 or 12 years. But the average residential real estate investor owns a property for 6 to 8 years. Well, if you're just owning that as an investment property and you never live in it, you're always going to be dealing with the tax problem. But because you're in the military and you can do these 3-year resets on your PCS cycle, you can essentially build up and hold on to these rental properties for 6 to 8 years or maybe longer and still come back and live in it in the future. You live in it as when you're like an E5 and then again as an E7 and then as an E8, right? And you keep resetting it, and now you've managed to own this property for a decade. You can still sell it under the 121C exemption. And the only time that you would really want to interrupt this cycle is once you can get $250,000 in profit as a single person, or $500,000 when you're married, right? So if that $400,000 house you bought in Waco is suddenly worth $900,000, you should probably sell it, right? Because you're going to run out of exemption. But for the most part, using your military orders and career sequence and career progression allows you to keep coming back, resetting as a primary residence, and then selling it and being tax exempt for capital gains. And that doesn't matter what kind of financing. Again, VA loan, FHA loan, conventional, it doesn't matter. So what if you can't, though, right? And that brings us to the second part of the Internal Revenue Code that we need to know about, and that is the 1031B exchange. It's a like-kind exchange. And what that means is that if you buy this property in Waco, you live there, PCS away, you hold on for 3 years, you thought you were going to come back, but you don't. And so you hold on to it again for another 3 years, and you're renting it out. You've been renting out for 6 years now, and now this property is worth, $600,000. You owe $250,000 on the mortgage. You really want to take that money out, that $350,000 out. And by selling it and then going out and buying, like a fourplex, or maybe a small apartment building, or maybe a small storefront back home in, Minneapolis, Minnesota, right? Because you're like, I've got so much equity in here. I can scale up to a better cash flowing rental back in the Midwest where I'm from. I want to do it. I've got it right here. I just got to sell this house, but I don't want to pay tax. Well, you don't have to, right? And in this case, like, this person is looking at $200,000 to $250,000 in profit, and normally that would be like a $50,000 tax hit because they haven't lived in it at all in the last 5 years, so it doesn't qualify for the 121C. But what the 1031B does is it says you can take one rental property or one investment property, sell it, and then you can turn around and you can buy another property, investment property, rental property. So that's what the like kind means. You can't take it and go buy a house for you to move into and become your primary residence. That's not like kind. But if it's another rental property, you can do it. And what it does is it allows you to defer the taxes. So that means instead of, you get your $600,000, pay off the mortgage, the IRS looks at it, and normally they'd be like, okay, you made $200,000 profit. It puts you into the 32% tax bracket. We'll take $64K out of that. Thank you very much. You're like, nope, I did a 1031 exchange. I'm going to take that entire profit that I made and go back and buy this other investment property. So what you have to do is, within 45 days of selling that property in Waco, you have to have found the property you're going to buy, and you have to complete purchasing it within 6 months. And the third part is that you have to have a qualified intermediary. Now that's just, they're all over the place, right? Like just ask your agent, hey, I need a qualified intermediary to do a 1031 exchange. They're like, oh, here we go, right over here. Like the bank does it or the title officer does it. Like it's totally fine. And when you do that, like I said, you don't pay taxes, but what happens is like the basis gets reset, and eventually the IRS is going to want their money. The only way to avoid the IRS getting any money is when you die, right? So when you die, the money, the property passes on to your next of kin, and in that moment, the IRS says, okay, we realize that the original basis for, John Doe was $400,000 over the course of 30 years of investing and 1031 exchanging. It's now, a $4 million 12-unit apartment complex in, Des Moines, Iowa. Maybe $3 million, right? Either way, the IRS is greedily looking at the fact that there's, something like $3.5 million worth of capital gains that they could tax. But because you hold on to it until you die and then you pass it on in your family, the IRS resets the basis to the market value at the time you die. And so if it's worth $3 million, I can't remember which one we decided on, right? 3 or 4 or 3.5, I don't know. But $3 million, instead of paying any tax, it goes on to your kid or your surviving spouse, resets the basis to $3 million, and then they can sell it. And they might make $1 million, $2 million profit, depending on how you're leveraged. I don't know, $500,000 profit. But because the basis and the sale price are the same, because of that step up at death and at inheritance, they will pay zero taxes, right? And so this is why you want to kind of combine the two bits in your portfolio, where you're doing the sale of your primary home when it qualifies for the 121C in order to get tax-free profits during your 20s, 30s, and 40s, during your military career, those kind of 20 years of like growth and wealth generation. And then on the side, you've got these other kind of like strategic properties that you're just going to 1031 exchange forward. And what this does for you, again, this is, as we kind of say in our tagline for this brand and this show is what we're trying to do is get the information out there so that you can retire comfortably and live the life you want, but also enjoy your money now, right? And so by buying affordable single-family homes that you live in as a primary residence and then selling them under the 121C exemption every few years, you can bring back those profits and that cash into your pocket to buy a bigger, nicer house or buy a boat or go on vacations or do whatever. And then in the background, you're slowly, over the course of like 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years, you're going to 1031 exchange that first rental property into a bigger one. And then 5 or 6 years later, you'll do it again. Then maybe as a retirement present, you do it again and you buy yourself that apartment or that commercial real estate. And eventually, you just need cash flow from that. Like that's supplementing your income, right? If you can make $3,000 a month income from the time you retire from the military at age, 42 or 43 because of your rental properties, when you add that on top of your pension, your VA disabilities, all that kind of stuff, you're going to be making more money than you were making when you were in uniform, right? You like retire, have to do less, and get paid more. And then at the end, you don't have to do that other thing where you are saving money for a family legacy, right? Because now that property is becoming that legacy, and it's going to take care of your family when you die. It's going to take care of your kids, your grandkids. You don't have to worry about gifts. You don't have to worry about, UTMA accounts or custodial brokerage accounts. The real estate will do it for you. All right, now the capstone, the end here to our campaign plan, how we're, over the course of 15, 20, 25 years, we're going to manage our real estate and use FHA loans, conventional loans, and VA loans. There's one point at which the VA loan is, again, it's like that haymaker, and that's once you retire. And why is that? Because when you retire from the military, you're going to file for your disability claim. The likelihood that you get a 0% disability is probably 0%. You're going to at least get 10%. That the average rating across all separated and retired military members is about 60%, but the most common rating is 100%. Right? So you're getting 10% if you get out after 3.5 years and you were an admin clerk, because they're going to be worried about carpal tunnel syndrome, or maybe your eyesight, or maybe your hearing for that one time you went to the rifle range. Actually, that's not fair. Admin probably goes to the rifle range like twice a year. They actually do their annual training, unlike, deploying combat units. Or you're going to get 100%. But once you get that, at least a 10% rating, the VA waives the funding fee, right? So now it's a genuinely 0% down, even if you used it a bunch of times before. So that means you should be buying your dream retirement home in the community of your choice. Like, if you can afford an $800,000 home in, I guess I don't even know if it's reasonable, maybe $1 million home in Monterey, California, a $500,000 home in northern Arkansas up in the Ozarks, right? Like a $500,000 home outside of Dallas. I mean, we're talking like 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 square feet, like brand new homes that 20% down, you'd have to come up with like 150, 200K. If you don't have 10% disability, the VA funding fee plus down payment, you're again 100, 150K to buy one of these like dream homes that you've been working so hard for over the last 15, 20 years. But if you have that disability, you can come with the VA loan. You'd be like, I'll do 0% down, 0% funding fee. Thank you very much. You might be looking at like $20,000 in total costs to buy this massive home, right? So in summary, right, that's your campaign plan. That's how you use all these different financing. That's like, this is for a 20-year military career right out of the gate as soon as you can. FHA, ideally FHA 203K loan. Then every 2 to 3 years, you're saving up enough to put a 10% down payment, and you use either a VA loan if it's a high price market, or a conventional loan if it's a low price market. Because with the VA loan, you can get in for 5% instead of 10% for a down payment. And then once you get into like the last 2-3 years of your career, whatever you have financed through the VA loan, that's a great one to do a cash out refi or to sell it and take profits through the 121C primary home exemption. Or you can sell it and do a 1031 exchange, and that can be a future rental property, again, saving you taxes, but resetting your VA eligibility to the maximum amount. And then as soon as you get out, separate or retire, and have your 10% disability rating, take that VA loan, the full amount. So in most parts of the country, that's $766,550, but in high-cost areas, it's $1.15 million. So California, Washington, Colorado, Northern Virginia, the tri-state area, up towards Boston, Nantucket, Hawaii, Alaska, and even in the Nashville area, you're going to have up to $1 million or $1.15 million in a VA loan limit. Can you imagine that, right? You're going to be looking around at all these other friends from high school who are coming over to visit. You're sitting there in your $1 million dream home, and they're going to find out that you got it for $20,000 or $25,000 in closing costs, right? So that's it. That's a wrap on this episode, and it's a game plan. We're gonna mirror it with a blog post coming up this next week, which we just kind of make a graph showing like the timelines and the sequencing and some of the decision points, so that you'll have something visual to go along with it, and really kind of set you up for success with your own SOP for how to become a real estate mogul while you're in the military, after you've separated or retired from the military, and make you an expert on blending different financing options. And then we'll come back next week. No, maybe in 2 weeks, depends. With one final episode in which we just talk about the ways that you make money in real estate, so that as you're doing this, you know which numbers to look at, how to calculate it, and how to help yourself figure out if it's a good deal or not. You know, it's not just a purchase price. It's not just the mortgage. There's a lot that goes into it. Traditionally 5 ways in the military. I argue there's 6, and that'll finally be the wrap on this series, Real Estate for the Military. So until then, want to challenge you, find somebody who you think would find this episode interesting, take value from this episode or the whole show or the series, whatever it is, and share it. And then please go back to wherever you listen to your podcast, Apple, Spotify, and just take a moment to give us a 5-star review, help bump us up in the algorithm and the search results so that we can continue to grow our community and get the education into the minds of service members, active, retired, National Guard, Reserve, everybody out there. There's over 2 million of us in uniform, and there's millions more on the retired rolls, and there's millions more who will follow in our footsteps. So let's make sure they can all get this. All right, and until then, stay financially fit and mission ready.